Hello, I'm Peter Wallman, and I'm here to talk to you about self-leadership. I've had quite a few questions from different people about this topic recently, and I thought, well, why not have a webinar and share what we know or I know about self-leadership, which is quite an important topic for leaders. So I'd like to show you by way of a document, and I'll take you through this. So when I started to think about this, I was thinking about my own life, and I was thinking, what does self-leadership mean for me? And through the time of being a teenager and going overseas and getting married and starting a business and being successful and then having a midlife crisis and the whole box and dice, my life has had many twists and turns. And I was thinking, well, actually, I have been leading my life. I have been practicing self-leadership all along. But what was interesting for me is that I was coming from a different place in myself. Initially, I think most of my motivation and leadership came from a space of ego. And I think now it's a different place in myself. So I thought, well, it's better actually to talk about authentic self-leadership, because that's what we're really aiming for. Self-leadership, I think, is something that happens anyway, but authentic self-leadership takes some work and takes some practice, and I'd like to really talk to you about that today. And first of all, I'd like to give you a little background as to what the lens is that I'm looking at this from. And having worked with thousands of passion maps, we actually have taken people on a journey to gain the inner resources so they can live in an authentic way and they can have everything they need to be able to share their gifts with the world. So isn't that ultimately what we all want to do, is to share our gifts with the world, whether it's a family or friends or the world at large? So my interest is really in what is the foundation of authentic self-leadership and how can we get there? So passion has been a big part of my life for the last 15 years, and understanding that. And I've developed a whole series of models, but one of the models is what I would call in, out, together, and space. We can track passion in to this core sense of self. We can track it out, which is what most people think about, which gives life direction and purpose. And we can share our passion with others, which is together. I won't go into the detail of that. That's the stuff of another webinar. But that's what I'm interested in. What is the foundation of authentic self-leadership? So I've created a definition here, and capacity to live your life guided by your inner wisdom and true to your own core essence. And my experience is that few of us have really got to the point of really deeply feeling what it's like to be in your core essence, and what is released in terms of wisdom and direction for your life in that place. So authentic self-leadership has a degree of naturalness about it, providing you can contact this place in yourself where it freely releases the way forward for you. It all starts with self-discovery. The question of who are we or who am I find a difficult question, because it depends how you answer it. You can answer it from a sense of ego or the mind, the logic. You can answer it from the point of view of your body. You can answer it in terms of your spirit. And it changes through life, the sense of who I am. And that's validated by developmental values systems like Claire Graves and spiral dynamics, in which we go through different phases in our life and our sense of self changes and our sense of the world changes. So my sense of self-discovery is more about what is most important for us and what does it feel like to be at the wellspring of self. And so we developed a deep dive model that we feel it's possible to do a deep dive into the essence of self. And that's a really beautiful place. And most people haven't ever been there before. We use passion as a vehicle to get there. And from this place of deep essence, a lot unfolds. Let me show you the model that we use. First of all, self-exploration. How do we understand each other from our mind, from our feelings, or from our spirit? And they're very different domains. So how do we take that journey deeply into spirit, and how do we find a sense of wholeness there? And how do we find a sense of self-validation? The self-validation is not a term that's often used, but it seems to me that unless we validate ourselves, unless we say, I'm okay, it's hard to move forward in a constructive and self-leadership way. So the stages in terms of preparation for self-leadership are exploration, validation, orientation, and I'll take you through those different elements. So the first is self-exploration. And we do this all the time. And, we particularly do it if we've had a tragedy in our lives or we've had a big change, because normally we don't have time for that. And I think that you can actually use your own passions, your own drives, your own energy to get to a deep place in which other parts of self become much clearer. Character becomes clearer. Sense of personality becomes clearer when you look at it from a deep place, but not when you look at it from an egoic or mind space. I know this sounds very conceptual, and it's hard to really understand this work unless you do it yourself, unless you actually have the experience, which I'd encourage you to do, obviously. So the first part is self-exploration and using whatever technique to get to a sense of that. Get to the depth of who you are. And then the next part is really getting to a point that, I'm okay. I'm okay. I know what's important in my life. I'm happy to be who I am. And again, many people never get to that point because they are caught up in, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable. The sorts of things that all of us seem to learn as young kids, but we can transcend. And once we transcend that, and again, from a deeper place is the best, we can validate who we are. Now, the work that we do, we actually work with the energy of the body. And it's really not possible to argue with the energy of your body and what is happening. We can all argue with our minds, and sometimes when we want to make a decision, we can go round and round and round and round in our minds, never making a decision. But we can't argue with what is happening for us energetically. So if we build a holistic pattern of our energetic self, then we have a deep sense of self that's able to give us the power to validate who we are and be okay. Now, I'll give you some examples of people that I think have really a sense of, I know who I am, I know what's most important for me, I'm okay, and I'm happy with who I am. Now, these are 4 people who've done that. One of the things about validating who I am, knowing who I am and moving on is that it can be a sort of a lonely path from there because we're the only people who are actually treading this path. And that can be a scary thing sometimes. Now, if we look at these people, Richard Branson in his early days took some great risks in terms of Virgin Music and Virgin Airlines, but ultimately became probably the world's best known entrepreneur. On the right, you have Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I was absolutely thrilled that she was prepared to take her newly born child into a United Nations session. No one had done it before, but that was her truth. She was okay with that. She didn't mind what other people thought. She thought that's the most important thing to do. And again, if we're concerned about other people validating us, we don't get to that point. Now, the woman on the bottom left is Malala Yousafzai, and she's the youngest Nobel laureate. And you'd know her story from Pakistan, where she encouraged young girls to go to school, and she was injured in the process, but she's now become a global figure. She certainly knows who she is and what's important and how to live from there. And finally, on the bottom, there's Bohemian Rhapsody sort of star, if you like, Freddie Mercury. Freddie died quite a long time ago, but was an extraordinary singer, and he had a scale of 4 octaves, which was very unusual. And he was an extraordinary singer, but he had all sorts of difficulties, and he just overcame them. And he lived his life the way he was. So all of those have been through a process of self-validation, and you don't get there unless you do the hard work and understand your inner world. Once you get to there, the next thing is, well, where do I go from here? You know, I have this sense of who I am, but where do I go from here? How do I orient myself towards what's most important and how I can express my gifts in the world? And this is where purpose and visioning come into play in terms of having a sense of purpose for life. We call that highest purpose, and have a vision for life and a sense of where do I go from here in every moment, or in most moments. So self-orientation is another really critical element of self-leadership, because if we don't know where we're going and who we want to become, how can we actually practice authentic self-leadership? We have to do it for ourselves. But in doing it for ourselves, we become much more of service to others, so everyone wins. Going back to the model again, through the process of self-exploration, self-validation, self-orientation, we get into the space of self-leadership, which ultimately is a practice. It's a practice of doing that every day, reminding ourselves what's important, reminding ourselves where we're going. And this is the space where we find a lot of serendipity arises. I have a very simple theory around serendipity, because I believe that we're part of two unfoldings, every one of us. We're unfolding as a person, we're unfolding as ourselves, but we're also part of the universal unfolding. And if we're true to ourselves and resonating with our essence, then we're also resonating with the universe at large. And so we become, as far as the operation of the universe at large, we become almost indistinct from it, and the universe throws things at us. Because my experience of people going through this process is there's extraordinary serendipity happens. And at one stage, I actually kept a serendipity diary, but it filled up so quickly I gave it up. And self-leadership, as I said, is a practice. You practice it every day, and it takes you where you want to go. Now, there are certain qualities that are really clearly we need. You can't actually just decide to live your life the way you want to live it without having the personal capacity to do that. So I think there are some really, really important qualities we need. And it obviously starts from self-responsibility. I have to take the perspective that I am totally responsible for myself. I'm totally responsible for what I create in the world. I have no capacity to blame anyone else for anything that happens to me. I'm actually part of the whole process, and I am responsible. And I think that's a really important place to be. And then that's also a place in which we find a sense of connectedness with the world. We need to persevere, we need to be resourceful. We certainly need to be self-aware, so if we get off track, we can move. And there's some genuine things that arise out of authentic self-leadership. First, a sense of integrity, and another sense of presence. And as I said before, serendipity arises naturally. So we do have qualities that are important, and we have skills that we need. Here I've just captured a few, but this can be extended indefinitely. But we need the capacity to be mindful of what is happening around us. If we don't do this, then when we get off track, we just stay off track. If we're mindful and we get off track, then we come back to ourselves. And as we go through life's transitions in us, both internally and externally, then we need to be mindful of where we are with that and to accept ourselves within that changing context. We need the capacity to reconnect with our deeper self. And I think when we create New Year's resolution, often we're much more in touch with our deeper self, or some would even say higher self, but it's a bigger self. And it's from that place that we make our resolutions. But then we go back to the world again, and we don't have that sense of self, that sense of broader self. We contract. Homeostasis is very real, which is the nature's way of wanting things to go back to where they were when a change happens. And so we need the capacity to get to the place where we can actually act authentically. And obviously clear decision making is something that comes out of that place. So I know that this has been somewhat conceptual, but I wanted to give you a framework to think in terms of being authentic in the journey of self-leadership. Some tools that we use for self-exploration: there's journaling, meditation, martial arts, counseling, coaching, insight writing, personal development courses. if they're constructive, not personal development courses that enable us to hide from the reality of our world and be in a place of things will be better when, because things won't necessarily be better when. There are plenty of people I've come across who do personal development courses out of a sense of, finding themselves. But I think it's the wrong way around. I think that we need to find ourselves to work out what professional development courses we need. Some tools for self-validation, the capacity to create a highest purpose statement, the ability to anchor back to self, and creating affirmations for ourselves. So if you do all of that, what happens? If you do all of that, where does it get you? Don't you want to have at the end of your life a sense that I did it my way? So we've got to the end of this little webinar, and I'd like to open this for questions. You can put your questions in the chat box beneath, and I think I've got time for 2 or 3 to answer. Here's the first one from John. Tell me more about the relationship between authentic self-leadership and self-leadership, or the difference between them. I think basically self-leadership can come from anywhere in ourselves. We can always practice that. In fact, we always do. Unless we're really, reacting emotionally for something that is potentially painful, and we go the other way, which I would say is a reactive thing. Apart from those circumstances, and apart from when we're programmed to do things, we are in a sense living our lives. I think I was programmed to have a conservative sort of life and start a business and marry the right person and have kids and do that whole thing. And I actually had a moment in my life when I thought, when I had the most, I was the unhappiest I'd ever been. There had to be more. There had to be more than what I'd been trained for. So that was a moment, I think, in which authentic self-leadership came alive. Before then, I think I was practicing self-leadership, but not authentically. So I think that's a really good question. And I think that also there's something about authentic self-leadership that opens up naturally because of your connection to a greater sense of humanity or the world that happens from an authentic place. I think you naturally become inclusive, you naturally become respectable for others, you naturally become much more creative, you naturally become more compassionate. And I think that in our modern world, especially in cities, it's difficult to do that because we're stressed, we're time poor, we don't have the time to naturally move into that place of self. Some people find it through dancing or through fishing or playing golf or whatever, and those are very, very important things to do if that's your way to coming back to who you are, and that's something that can help you go there. So I hope that answers your question. And there's another one from Georgina. Is authentic self-leadership necessary for successful collaboration? That's a fantastic question. And I think I might just open up, actually be able to, I can't see you, but I know you can see me. So thinking about collaboration, the ultimate collaboration is marriage or partnership. And I know from the work that we do in terms of conscious relationship or conscious partnership that we have to come to that from our own authenticity. And if we both come to that from our own authenticity, then it's an absolutely joyous place. If we have a shared intention in the collaborative environment, and collaboration is a similar idea of having really clear objective, and then being conscious about what we bring to it, so that the whole relationship is one of conscious contribution. We contribute to it, and then the relationship actually contributes to the world. I think authentic self-leadership is necessary for very successful collaboration. I don't think you can come to it from anything other than that place. And certainly if you want the collaboration to be enduring, that's important. It's a notoriously difficult thing for people to do, to have successful collaborations. And I think one of the reasons is they don't come from an authentic place. And I've seen situations that I've actually facilitated where people have come together and they just, energetically, they just don't fit. They shouldn't work together. Everything is logical. All the logic is there to work together. But the energy or the spirit says a big no. And this can be looking at this collaboration or this relationship in a constructive, conscious way, makes that very, very clear. So I think we're out of time. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions. I think we can go to the remainder of this, which is, if you want to know more about what we do, you can always visit our website. We have daily quotes. We have a blog. You can get a free consultation with me, and you can book that online. Or if you want to know about events, you can email us or what we're doing, and you can join our Passion Leaders group on LinkedIn. So there's plenty of ways to connect with us. There's plenty of ways of learning more about this, so just do it. Currently, we've got events you might be interested in. We're running our first remote passion mapping program, which takes you along that same curve that we've discussed today. We've got a Bombora retreat in Bali. Details of that are on the website. And we're running a passion and healing and health. How do we actually use passion to improve health and healing? And that's in San Diego in September. Bali's in September. The remote program is going to run from time to time. And if you're interested in that, please contact us and express an interest. So many, many thanks. I'm going to say sayonara, and hopefully you'll join me again in one of these webinars. Goodbye.